A 31-year-old nurse was on her way to work when two men forced their way into her car at a traffic light. A few hours later, her car was found, burned at the end of a road with her nurse uniform discarded nearby. Police weren't able to find any leads or suspects until a woman came forward with claims of a psychic vision, leading them to the exact location of the body. 31-year-old Melanie Uribe worked as a nurse in the city of Burbank, California, which is located about 7 miles away from Hollywood. She was a single mother raising her 8-year-old son, and her friends described her as a responsible worker and a dedicated mother. Unfortunately, there is limited information available regarding Melanie's early life. On December 15, 1980, Melanie didn't appear for her night shift at the hospital without any prior notice. This was unusual for Melanie as she was considered reliable and punctual by her colleagues. Melanie's employer became concerned, so he called her home phone, but there was no answer. It was quite perplexing. If she wasn't at work or at home, where could she be? Her colleagues didn't waste time and immediately went to the police station to report her disappearance. Detectives initiated a search and quickly received a call about a vehicle that was on fire. They found Melanie's burnt pickup truck along with a nurse's uniform nearby. That day, Melanie was on her way to work when she had to stop at a traffic light. Witnesses reported that two men took advantage of the situation and entered her vehicle, one through the driver's door and the other through the passengers, leaving Melanie between them. The criminals then took off in the car with Melanie inside.
And one of them jumped around the car on the driver's side, and the other one comes running around on the other side, and she was screaming.
The witnesses' description of the suspects didn't yield any concrete leads, and the search for Melanie continued. They conducted a comprehensive search in the valley, went door to door looking for witnesses, and patrolled the area on horseback, but unfortunately, they came up with nothing. The detectives had no evidence to work with until December 17, 1980, 2 days after Melanie's disappearance, when a woman named Etta Smith contacted the police. Etta was 32 years old and worked at an aerospace facility in Burbank. She claimed to have had a vision that led her to know the approximate location of Melanie. Etta said she heard about Melanie's disappearance on the radio while she was at work, and it mentioned that the police were searching houses near where her car was discovered. At that moment, she experienced a sudden revelation that the missing person might not be confined to a room, but rather in an open area.
And they said that they had found the lady's vehicle on a dead-end street and that they were making a house-to-house search for her. And as soon as they said house-to-house search, it was as if I heard someone speaking to me, said she's not in a house. And as soon as that thought registered, I saw exactly where she was. It was like there was a picture in front of me.
Immediately after that, she claimed to have had a vision. In her vision, she saw a canyon with a winding road, sparse bushes all around, and distant hills ahead. There was a path leading to something white. She was convinced that in front of her was Melanie's uniform and her body. She described this picture vividly, like a scene from a movie. The police, understandably, didn't believe her story. Self-proclaimed psychics offering help to the police in missing person cases is not uncommon, but this case was a bit different. Firstly, the woman had never considered herself a psychic, and secondly, she held a prestigious position at an aerospace facility with security clearance. At that time, the police didn't have any other leads, so they decided to give her the benefit of the doubt, even though they were very skeptical of her story. She was then given a map, and she pointed to the approximate area where she believed Melanie's body was located. She pointed to a region on the outskirts of the San Fernando Valley near Lopez Canyon. The indicated area was pretty big, and it would take several officers and a few days to conduct a proper search. The investigator told Etta that they would send their personnel there for investigation. However, Etta had concerns that her words might not be treated seriously, and they wouldn't search for Melanie properly. She decided to ask several family members for help, including her daughter, and together they headed to the location from her vision to look for Melanie themselves. As they drove along the canyon, she claimed to have sensed Melanie's presence and had a strong feeling that her body was at the bottom. They made the decision to go further down the canyon, and as they proceeded, Etta noticed fresh tire tracks on the road. In her own words, she believed these tracks were somehow connected to the missing woman. According to Etta, she placed her hand on the impressions of the tire tracks, and she immediately felt trauma. She was certain that these tracks belonged to Melanie's vehicle. They continued descending further, and her daughter, who was looking out the window, noticed something sticking out of the bushes. Etta stopped the car, approached the bushes, and was horrified to discover Melanie's body. The only clothing on her was a pair of shoes that belonged to a nurse's uniform. She immediately reported her discovery to the police, who arrived at the scene. The body was then handed over to medical experts, who confirmed the identity of the deceased. Sadly, it was indeed Melanie. She had died from severe beatings, and it was evident that she had been subjected to sexual assault before her death. Now let's take a look at the situation from the police's perspective. A woman comes to them and points to the exact location where the missing woman's body is found. Then, a few hours later, she personally goes to that location, and Melanie is indeed discovered there. Naturally, the first thought that crossed the detectives' minds was whether this woman might have some involvement in Melanie's death. They detained and interrogated her for several hours. She agreed to undergo a polygraph test, and the results indicated that she was not lying. However, even with this information, the police were not entirely convinced. The detectives expressed skepticism, suggesting that she might have been attempting to deceive the polygraph by controlling her breathing and concealing a lie. They considered two possibilities. Either she was directly involved in the abduction of Melanie, or she had some indirect knowledge of the details of the crime from those involved, perhaps through conversations with friends who knew something. These were the theories the detectives considered, and they didn't seriously entertain the possibility of intuition or psychic ability. Etta was held in custody, and the next morning she was charged with taking Melanie's life. The fact that the woman knew the location of the body was a key piece of evidence, so the police started readying the case for court proceedings. However, 4 days later, something unexpected happened. A police informant reported to the detectives that a young man had been bragging to his friends about his involvement in taking a woman's life and how he had escaped punishment. The police quickly located him and brought him in for questioning. Since there was no direct evidence against him, the police needed to obtain a confession. They pretended to have evidence to prove his guilt and told him that by admitting to the crime and providing information about his accomplices was his only chance to avoid the death penalty. The young criminal, fearing for his life, decided to confess and provided information about the two friends who were involved in the crime. 3 individuals were found guilty: 20-year-old Lewis Morgan, 21-year-old Spencer Nelson, and a 17-year-old teenager whose name was not disclosed due to being a minor. The other 2 perpetrators were quickly arrested and interrogated. Both of them admitted their guilt, providing accurate descriptions of the events on that fateful night and guiding the police to the location where they had left Melanie's body. This information had not been made public, indicating that only the actual perpetrators could possess such knowledge about their motive. Murder and robbery were almost a form of amusement for them, and they attacked the girl without hesitation when they saw such an opportunity. With confessions in hand, the court sentenced all 3 of them to life imprisonment. But the story doesn't end there. Going back to Etta Smith, the criminals confessed to the police about all the details of what they had done, but they denied any knowledge of this woman. There was no apparent connection between them, as she was much older and lived in a completely different place. It was highly unlikely that 3 young men would have shared such sensitive information with her. Considering all this, the police had no choice but to release Etta and drop all charges against her on the same day. Since then, she returned to her normal life. According to her, a similar incident has never repeated itself. In 1987, almost 7 years after these events, she decided to sue the police for the damage caused to her. Despite the fact that the police had all the legal grounds for her arrest, she managed to win the trial and received a little more than $26,000 in compensation. Initially, her lawyer asked for $250,000, but the judge considered this amount excessive for 4 days of imprisonment. Many years later, people from Hollywood came up with the idea of making a film or series based on this story, with the woman's character in the lead role. However, this idea remained unrealized and might never come to fruition. Now let's consider if Etta really found Melanie's body using her intuition. As mentioned earlier, psychics offering help to the police isn't uncommon, but their information is often unreliable guesswork. In Etta's case, she found the body on her own. But does this prove psychics exist, or was it a lucky guess? We can speculate that Etta might have been familiar with the area and logically deduced that a secluded location like a canyon would be a potential spot for a crime. Perhaps she relied on this version and happened to be right. However, her motivation remains unclear. She didn't ask for money for her assistance and instead sued the police 6 years later. Let me know what you think down in the comments below.